Welcome to the Evolution 2.0 podcast, where we explore the intersection of art, technology, business, biology, and spirituality. Here you'll discover new trends in evolution that are changing the way we think about everything. This is your host, Perry Marshall, author of Evolution 2.0, 80/20 Sales and Marketing, and Guides to Ethernet, Google, and Facebook. I'm founder of the Evolution 2.0 Prize, a quest for the missing link between earth science, the information age, and life itself. Let's join the conversation now. Good afternoon. This is Perry Marshall, and I am here with Joel Salatin. And I interviewed Joel about 6 months ago. And we talked about the future of the food industry. And just maybe a month later, I wrote a blog post called 10 Predictions for 2020 to 2029. And I said that higher education was going to crash and burn and a bunch of different things. And one of the things I said, that the Uberization of food is one of the big things that's going to happen in the next decade. I said, remember when most American beers taste like urine? The surge of microbrews changed all that. Same is going to happen to food. I interviewed alternate farming expert Joel Salatin and discovered that stifling U.S. food regulations are based on 1906 technology. If you own a cow or goat, you can go to jail for selling milk to your next door neighbor. Just as Uber and Airbnb were illegally in most cities. The Uberization of food will spawn new industries and artisanal careers. Watch for the resurgence of local craftsmanship and agriculture. Farming is cool once again. Then COVID hit. And I was already booked to talk to Joel several months later because I just felt like I want more of this. Well, now we got COVID, and I got to talk to this guy because I bet he can tell me all kinds of interesting things that are going on in the food business because of COVID. So, dude, wide open door, walk through it. Tell me what you're seeing.
Well, boy, that's a pretty wide open question. Maybe the best thing to do would be to start with the empty store shelves that we saw about 6 or 7 weeks ago. That literally scared everybody to death. And that was initially not really a food shortage. It was a diversion of the two primary tracks of food in the country. So there's a retail track that goes to, retail people. And then there's a wholesale track that goes to institutions and restaurants and things like that. Trust me, when the University of Virginia buys Cheerios for the dining services, they don't get them in a little box. They get them in a 55-gallon drum, right? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So you've got these two very separate tracks of food. And when all the restaurants suddenly shut down, the packaging and that track, it was like a narrow gauge and a wide gauge railroad. You couldn't just shift engines and train cars. You couldn't shift packaging on the tracks. And so, we saw it right here on our farm. We actually, for the first time, I think maybe ever, we ran out of ground beef for retail for 3 days. We were actually out. Now, we had 5,000 pounds of 5-pound packages for restaurants in the freezer, but retail didn't want 5-pound packages. They wanted 1-pound packages. So that's a perfect example of these two tracks. And so it's taken a little bit for the redirection of all that institutional wholesale bulk packaging to get either repackaged, cooked and put in a can, something to ease it off. So that's the one thing. The second thing that happened, of course, was then the shutting down of the big processing plants. Smithfield and Tyson and Purdue and all these big outfits, they started closing because they had coronavirus problems in their workforce. So they had not only people were sick, but then they had employees that were scared to come into work because they might get sick. Now, first of all, we've got to understand that right now in the United States, about the only place in the country where thousands of people assemble every day, shoulder to shoulder, in cold, dark, damp conditions is these mega processing facilities.
Yeah.
And the workforce, by and large, the workforce for these things, and I am not xenophobic. I grew up till I was 4 years old in Venezuela. So I am not xenophobic, but I can tell you that 90% of the people who work in these plants are foreign people. They've come here from Somalia and from Kenya and from Mogadishu, whatever. They've come from all over the world, and they're living in very crowded conditions, trying to save a nickel, eating poorly, so they can bring mom and dad and brother and sister and families over to the land of opportunity of America. And so you've got this stress of foreign living, foreign. It is stressful, when you're in a new country. And that assimilation, the crowding in the home, the poor dietary shift from your native country, and you're crowded every day with thousands of people in a cold, dark, damp place. So it was a perfect vector. It was a perfect, storm setup. And so when the processing went down, when these big plants went down, there was this big aha moment in the country when people realized, half of America's meat processing capacity is owned by foreign interests, either the Chinese or the Brazilians. I mean, that's amazing. Half of American meat processing is owned by foreign entities. And number two, that, 90% of the U.S. meat, poultry, and dairy is handled by about 150 mega plants of 3,000 or 4,000 employees. And so suddenly this aha light bulb went off in people and said, whoa, that is a lot of centralization, amalgamation, and a lot of power assembled in one spot. And so when that happened, then the farmers, the bottleneck was the farmers had the pigs or the chickens or whatever, but they couldn't get them processed because the processing plant shut down. So then they started euthanizing the animals and dumping milk, not because there wasn't a market for it, and not because they couldn't produce it, but because they couldn't get it processed in this little handful of mega processing facilities. So I know we're going to go here in our discussion, but I can't help but say, so the obvious point of this is, well, maybe we better have a few more plants scattered around and have them a little smaller and community oriented and decentralized and democratized so that we don't have all that fragility in one spot.
So is that actually happening? Or was it just like, oh, well, we kind of solved that. Off we go.
Yeah, is it actually happening? They always say that a crisis doesn't make a trend. It simply either accelerates it or makes a trend more obvious. And so the truth is that these mega processing plants have built-in structural vulnerability due to sheer scale and size. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that a hamburger at a fast food restaurant comes from as many as 600 animals. Pieces of 600 animals are in one hamburger. That is an accident waiting to happen. When you get a hamburger from me, from my farm, that hamburger comes from one animal. How much of this is on? Yes, they are struggling right now. These mega plants are struggling to stay open. They're struggling to make their workers feel safe. Yeah, they're very much struggling now. And we're going to see the food prices. I mean, right now, I don't know if this was in your prediction, but for sure, everybody is predicting food prices to go up substantially, like, 20%, pretty substantial over the next, 4 to 5 months as the processors try to absorb, new safety measures, new rules, new regulations, new infrastructure in-house to do this. But look, the fact is that the recalls, the pathogens, the foodborne bacteria, all the things that this really put a light on, those have been ongoing problems in the industry for a long, long time. This is nothing new. It's just that this brought it, brought it to everybody's awareness and forefront. It's endemic, it's embedded, it's a vulnerability of the system, and the coronavirus simply brought it to the top of the, it got it floating where you could see it.
So early after COVID hit, I was talking to a lady I knew, and she was on some committee to try to get telemedicine approved in the state of Illinois. And everybody thought it would take 2 or 3 years. And because of COVID, it took 24 hours. And I think the the governor signed some law. It's like, okay, all the medical providers, all the insurance companies, you got to accept telemedicine. You got to be able to do a doctor appointment on Zoom. I don't care what you think. Like, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden, Blue Cross, Illinois, like, okay, we cover that now. And it was like, yay. Yeah. So probably the next thing that crossed my mind was, or at least as soon as I heard about the food shortages, like, well, that ought to happen in food too. I would think that all these 1906 regulations, somebody'd start saying, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you got a goat, sure. Oh, you got a cow, sure. Are you seeing any of that?
Well, actually, there's an interesting thread on this. And so the answer is a little bit yes. So Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky introduced, like 5 years ago, what's known as the PRIME Act. And PRIME is an acronym. And what it does in Congress, and what it does is it gives the state a right to allow custom processed animals to be sold by the piece. That's never been allowed before. You could only buy a quarter or a half, and so it was a big volume to if you had it custom. And then the packages came back, stamped not for sale. And after COVID hit, within 2 weeks, this bill that he's had that has literally languished for 5 years, suddenly he had 18 co-signers on it, because the fact is we have summarily, over the last 20 years, we've summarily annihilated in this country, we have annihilated the community abattoir, the little butcher shop, the little slaughterhouse. I mean, there's a lot of little butcher shops that cut meat, but I'm talking about actually killing the animal. You got to get the animal dead before you can cut it up. And so our county 60 years ago, we had like 10 of these. Communities had these scattered around. They were little mom and pop organizations, some family that had a knack for cutting meat, and so they would set up shop, and they do all that locality, all that. Well, the regulations have gradually run them out of business. That's partly it. It's also partly due to the fact that the American consumer quit buying bulk meat. They quit buying quarters and halves. They don't even have a freezer anymore, and they can't even put their hands on $400. So the perfect storm was that these little community abattoirs went out of business. And so the PRIME Act that Congressman Thomas Massie has put in, the PRIME Act would give the state the freedom to allow these little community abattoirs to sell meat locally, not across the state lines, but intrastate, if a state wanted to. And he tells me that he's had calls all over the country from people who did go out of business, but the little building is still sitting there, and they've told him the day this passes, they're ready to reopen the doors and start processing meat again. So this is not a production problem. It's not an actual farming problem. It is a processing/regulation problem that doesn't allow market access for a wider range of choice.
I'm a little puzzled that this would even be laws at the federal level. Like, I would think that how you process food would be a state thing. So are there a bunch of federal laws about this too? Like, that just seems weird to me.
Yeah, well, the Food Safety Inspection Service, FSIS, Food Safety Inspection, which was developed by Teddy Roosevelt in 1907 after Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle. The FSIS is a federal agency, and it absolutely oversees from the federal level all meat and poultry processing regulations. To the extent that, it has gradually gained more and more control. When it was instituted, every state had, some sort of a kind of a program, or shortly thereafter. And what's happened over the last, 20 years is many states, about half the states actually, have even given up their state program and just said, we're not going to fool with this. We're just going to let the feds do it. And so states don't even have an agency now even does this. It's been completely given over to the federal. But I agree with you. If this were a state issue, then the change would not be so hard. It's a lot harder to change things at the federal level than the state level.
No doubt. Okay, so are you seeing any other trends other than just meat packing? Like, because of COVID, are there other trends that have suddenly accelerated? Because I think you're right. COVID accelerated everything. It accelerated the digital, accelerated going virtual, accelerated going more digital, accelerated Zoom. So what else is going on?
Yes, there are definitely several trends developing. One certainly is gardening. If you try to buy garden seeds right now, you'll find that most of the seed companies are literally sold out. Wow. Ditto for chicks, for backyard chickens. We have sold more little twosies and threesies for backyard chickens, for just for eggs, for people to have eggs in their own backyard. So the people who make little backyard coops, little kits that you can buy, people that sell a few chickens, everything is sold out. Freezers are sold out. In our area, in our region of Virginia, you cannot buy a freezer anywhere now until sometime in late August. So seeds, gardening, all gardening supplies, gardening tools, gardening everything. The next big one is going to be canning supplies. So if you're going to can, you better get your canning lids now, because there's going to be a shortage of canning lids and jars and things like that. Storage, all of the packaging for any kind of home storage of anything, a home anything having to do, anything that a prepper would get, okay, for their kitchen, for do-it-yourself dehydration, sprouting kits, the little sprouting kits, all of that kind of do-it-yourself. This has been the biggest injection of activity and interest in the kind of culinary do-it-yourself movement that I've seen in my lifetime. I mean, it's even way bigger than Y2K. I mean, we had a shot of it at Y2K, but this is a lot bigger because it's lasting longer. We didn't have any empty store shelves at Y2K. Y2K ended up being a hysteria that in a moment of time dissipated. COVID, it's a longer term deal, so it seems more endemic. It's like it's going to have a longer tail. It's going to have a longer tail out there. But, we're seeing, for example, on our farm, we direct market. So one of the huge things we've seen is just the demand for shipping. People don't want to go out of their house. They don't want to go to the supermarket. So they're ordering online. So our shipping with our food has just gone through the roof. We have to ration. We don't have enough to go around. We've actually irritated people, because we always had it and then suddenly we don't. And I can tell you, farmers around the country, that's happening around the country. People have come into our farm and saying, I'm never going to go back to the supermarket. There's been a huge breakdown of trust in the ability of the industrial food chain to be there for them. And so this is stimulating questions. There are all sorts of aha moments coming up here. And so this seeking an alternative for whether it's alternatives of provenance, alternatives of production, alternatives of storage, all of these things are, confluing as people start to jump off the ship. The fact is that the mega processing facilities are aircraft carriers, and farms like us and the little slaughterhouse that we use, little community abattoir of 20 people, we're a speedboat. And in times of crisis, it's a lot easier to adjust a speedboat than an aircraft carrier.
Okay, so speaking specifically to the breaking down of trust, because that is a huge theme in the world, obviously. So can you project forward a year or two? Because COVID, as far as I can possibly tell, even if it's mostly under control in the next few months, even if that were to be the case, there's still going to be lingering, I don't see it completely going away, right? So there's always going to be some people that are really nervous, and that's going to put pressure on legislation. So if you could fast forward 6 months, a year, 2 years, what are some dominoes that you see tipping over, especially legally, that would, like, all of a sudden there is an Airbnb of food or an Uberization of food? Just we could all see that maybe generally, but
Sure.
What are some specific?
Yeah. So one of the things that will likely proliferate is any kind of exemption for direct sales. So when a farmer sells directly to a customer, I'm not talking about selling to Walmart or exporting to Thailand. I'm talking about selling directly to a customer. And we already saw this trend beginning with what we call the cottage food laws. There are now several states that have what are called cottage food laws that either define by sale type or by volume. If you want to bake a cake in your kitchen and sell it to a neighbor, you can do so. Now you can't bake that cake and take it down to Walmart and put it on their shelf. But if there's a direct relationship, that kind of commerce, I think, could absolutely be facilitated, because that's the most secure commerce. It's neighbor to neighbor interaction. So anything that allows neighbor to neighbor interaction should accelerate. So these cottage food laws are absolutely proliferating. In Virginia now, we have that anybody can bake and sell it to an end user, directly to a customer without inspection. Baked items. We've got a pickle bill. You can sell $3,000 worth of pickle from your home kitchen without any inspection. So I can imagine that to proliferate. Maybe we'll have, like in Oregon. In Oregon, you can sell milk from 3 cows, not 100, but 3 cows. If you have 3 cows, you can sell their milk direct to people without any inspection. It's those kinds of recognition that at low scale and neighborhood commerce, the inherent transparency in those transactions becomes its own regulator. It becomes its own auditor. It's a little bit like in Virginia, for example, you can keep 3 children in your home as a daycare without any licensing. Why? If all you keep is 3 children in your home, chances are you're going to be very involved with the parents. The parents are going to be involved with you. They're going to be coming, looking in your house, no that sort of thing. So there is absolutely not only a legal precedent, but reasonable precedent for appreciating that if you come to my farm and you buy a chicken from me, that is a different transaction than when you go to Walmart and buy a chicken from who knows where, fed who knows what and grown by who knows who. It's a very different transaction. And so the Uberization, and some business people are using the term the atomization. In other words, the democratization, the atomization as assembling and as the physical retail interface becomes more and more hampered either by regulation or by social fears. It's going to make it more and more, there's going to be more and more push to make it easier to ship, to ship this stuff on FedEx or UPS or whatever, and more pressure to be able to do neighbor-to-neighbor transactions. That's going to represent the atomization and the democratization of the food system.
I would then predict that, from what you're saying, that any kind of book, course, training, resource that helps people figure out how to make money in farming or food production on a small scale, like any cottage industry education, I would expect that those book sales are going up, those online courses are going up, those product sales, and that would be a very fast growing business, at least right now.
Yes, absolutely. Amy Fuel, who founds and operates the Homesteaders of America conference. It's a national conference held here in Virginia every fall. After COVID hit, in one day, they had 10,000 new signups to their website about do-it-yourself homesteading. So anything regarding, it's incredible, And so anything regarding self-sufficiency, do-it-yourselfing, including how to find good food. How do you find authentic food and secure food? I mean, I've just written this new book. It's just been out for less than a month now, Beyond Labels. And it's all about a continuum toward and procuring authentic food, integrity food, because you don't want to go to the doctor. You don't want to go to the hospital. You don't want to. So for the first time in my lifetime, in common conversation, I'm hearing people talking about, how do I build an immune system? How do I build my immune system? That's a wonderful conversation. And realizing, wow, if you wait for the government to take care of you, or the pharmaceutical company to take care of you, or Tyson's or IBP, whatever, if you wait for them to take care of you, you're probably going to wait too long. And so you may as well get started now, growing some herbs, doing some self-help health stuff and food stuff and growing stuff, and just essentially what this COVID thing is, it has forced us into home centricity. And we have not been a home-centric culture for a long time. We have essentially viewed our homes as pit stops between everything that's important in life, as opposed to a germination tray that makes us capable of doing everything that's important in life. A pit stop rather than a launch pad. And so what this has done is it's slowed us down, brought us home, and people are having these new conversations now about home centricity, do-it-yourselfism. I mean, Lowe's and Home Depot. I mean, you'd think they're having conferences every day. Those places are exploding with customers doing their little, raised bed, and I'll put this little addition on, and I'm going to fix that old, carpet in the back room, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, that whole self-help, self-support thing, self-culinary, self-kitchen is it's exploding. It's exploding.
Joel, this has been fantastic. I thought this was probably going to be really interesting, and I was not disappointed. Well, tell them about your book and tell people, where do I get more Joel Salatin?
Well, the book Beyond Labels, it's a great book. It was, in fact, right now today, it's #1 on Amazon's nutrition section. So it's selling very well. I co-authored it with Dr. Sina McCullough, who is a PhD, a bionutritionist, who on the standard American diet almost died with an autoimmune disease. She was planning her funeral, and then, finally awakened to her own responsibility for her health. And she's now a vibrant, happy Energizer bunny, and did it over all sorts of, from spiritual to physical to, lifestyle changes. And so the book essentially takes people on a continuum, starting them from the gas station food counter all the way to their own home garden or their, patio, pot garden. In pots. Well, I mean, it could be a pot garden too, but I don't care what you grow in the pots. The point is that it takes people on a continuum. And so it's a conversation between Sina, with Dr. McCullough, and myself, as if you're sitting in an audience and it's like a play and we're just conversing. And there's each chapter is called a practical bite. And so it's things that people can do on a continuum as they move to a better place in their food and lifestyle and healthy living. You can find out more about me at our farm website, polyfacefarms.com. All you got to do is type in about POLY and it'll probably come up, Polyface Farms, and it's got everything from my speaking schedule to things about the farm to how you can order food, all those things.
Well, Joel, fantastic. Thank you very much, Joel Salatin. And I just think it's wonderful. You have been working for a very long time on an idea whose time has come. So congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I'm on the crest of a tsunami here, and I just hope I can stay on the surfboard.
All right. Well, here's to stand on the surfboard. Good to see you, Joel. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
Until next time, this is the Evolution 2.0 podcast, bridging science, technology, business, and the big questions. To ensure you never miss an episode, subscribe on iTunes or on your preferred player. If you like the show, rate us on iTunes. Join our email list and social media at cosmicfingerprints.com.